O'clock on the dot. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jenny Cole. I'm the Director of Collections Access here at the Filson Historical Society. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's program and for supporting the mission of the Filson to collect, preserve, and share the significant history and culture of Kentucky and the Ohio Valley. We're going to have some really interesting culture here tonight. Thank you for joining us for Races, Games, and Olympic Dreams, a sportscaster's life. Tom Hammond is recognized as one of the leading network sports broadcasters in the United States. His achievements include college and professional basketball and football game broadcasting, thoroughbred horse racing, and coverage of the Olympic Games. Tom earned an animal science degree at UK, specializing in equine genetics, and throughout the 70s and 80s served as a sales announcer at the Keeneland Thoroughbred Sales and at Thoroughbred Horse Sales in 16 other states. He's recognized as a national expert on thoroughbred pedigrees. His time as sports director at WLEX TV in Lexington springboarded him to his work as a sports announcer with NBC and his award-winning coverage of the Breeders' Cup in 1984. Tom was the first recipient of the annual Outstanding Kentuckian Award given by the A.B. Chandler Foundation and has been inducted into the Kentucky Journalism Hall of Fame, the University of Kentucky Hall of Distinguished Alumni, and the Kentucky Sports Hall of Fame. I'm sure I could go on, but I think that's what they're actually here to talk about tonight. Our other speaker is Mark Story. Mark has worked in the Lexington Herald Sports Department since 1990 and has been a Herald Leader sports columnist since 2001. He's covered every Kentucky Louisville football game since 94, nearly every U of L UK basketball game since 96, and every Derby since 1994. This UK graduate is also a 24-time first place winner in the Kentucky Press Association writing contest and is a multiple-time recipient of the Kentucky Sports Writer of the Year. So we've got some amazing award winners here tonight, and please join me in welcoming Tom Hammond and Mark Story. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny, and we're honored to be invited to the Filson, and we even dressed up for the occasion, and to have two lowly sports reporters in for considering the roster of people you usually have is quite an honor. And as you were giving that introduction, I was thinking, you know, in this business, it's pretty easy to get a big ego, get a big head. And it reminds me of a story I'll tell before we get started with our little back and forth. At the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta, I don't know if you remember that, but it's when Michael Johnson became the first man to ever win the 400 meters and the 200 meters in the same Olympics. And he won the 400. And then he lined up in the 200, which is just halfway around the curve of the track. That was before everybody had cameras on their cell phones. So he had golden shoes on, if some of you remember. And as he went around that curve of the track, the flash bulbs just followed him around. It was so exciting that I called the race and realized at the end of it that I had risen from my seat in the excitement. But as I said, you know, to the finish line and into Olympic history, and he did it with a world record. So afterwards, everybody's saying, nice call, great call, it was sung, and we go back to the hotel, and there was a place, bar up in the hotel where all we took over the whole hotel, NBC. So there's a place that we all went back to rehash the day's events, and we're up there, and everybody's pounding me on the back, great call, and everything else, and so I'm feeling pretty good about myself. So the next morning, I'm still, you know, walking on air, and we get to the stadium for the day's events, and I'm getting ready. It's about 2 hours before the first race, and I look up into the stands, and there's somebody going, and I look again, and my goodness, that's Jimmy Carter. And so I said, now, this is pretty cool. Here is a former president that's going to give me a great compliment on my call last night. So I walked up to him and up in the stands, and I said, yes, sir, Mr. President. And he said, you work for NBC. Can you move that camera? It's blocking my view. So much for the big head after the call. So Jim Phelps just made a grand entry. Thank you. Anyway, Mark Story is the man that really put the book together. When I retired after the Winter Olympics in 2018, I wasn't really ready to write a book, even though everybody had said over the years, you ought to write a book. So the University of Kentucky was after me to do an oral history. And finally, the little thing clicked, and I said, maybe we can do the oral history and the book at the same time, but I need a real writer. And so I called Mark Sorey at the Herald Leader. We had done lots of stories back and forth over the years, and I asked him if he'd be interested. He said yes. So that was the clincher, and we worked together on the book.
Tom and I are just going to have a conversation, and hopefully we tell some good stories, and then we'll throw it open for questions at the end. It was a thrill for us when we saw the Filson Club on our book event list, so it's an honor to be here. So Tom, we are going to do a little more history than we normally do as kind of an homage to the club. Now, Tom, your maternal grandfather, Thomas Poe Cooper, one of the most important people in the early decades of the University of Kentucky in the 20th century. And how big a role did he play in your life?
A big role. He was always the ideal that I would shoot for. There were so many people that told me over the years how great a man he was, and he got accolades from all over the country. He came to the University of Kentucky in 1918, and he was the Dean of Agriculture and the Director of the Experiment Station. This is when agriculture was the most important thing in Kentucky and the country, for that matter, I guess. And so he took over at UK as the Spanish flu pandemic was sweeping the world, as World War I was ending. And then he guided it through the Great Depression, through World War II, through the Korean War, and to the beginnings of the Cold War. And the current dean tells me that there'll never be another dean to stay 33 years as he did, and guided the university through that time. Coming to Louisville today, I had a couple of thoughts. I remember that I rode with him to Louisville a lot. He came to Louisville a lot, and I remember riding with him up US 60 in his Dodge to come to Louisville. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, he was the chairman of the State Fair Board when in 1950 they voted to move the fair from the west end of Louisville down to where it is now. And of course, that development included Freedom Hall, which was built with the idea of hosting the State Fair horse show. I don't think basketball entered their mind at that time for the Freedom Hall. But so anyway, my grandfather been a great influence on my life. While my dad was in the Army, my mom and I lived with my grandparents in what is now called Cooper House on the University of Kentucky campus, which has just been renovated to the tune of $5 million. Built in 1865, it's the oldest house on the campus now, and they've done a beautiful job of renovating it, and it's sort of the front door to the College of Agriculture, Food, and Environment now, and serving a great purpose. So I have a long history that goes back to the University of Kentucky, and I was a UK ag grad myself.
Now, Tom, if you read our book, you'll understand that Tom did not study to be a broadcaster. That was not his course of study. So, Tom, is it fair to say that the entire course of your professional life was altered by the fact you went to a party?
Well, I went to a lot of parties, so I don't know why I didn't get much more jobs than that. Yeah, I majored in animal science. I thought I was going to go into the thoroughbred horse business in some capacity. In the summers, I worked at the racetrack, Belmont Park in Saratoga. I was a groom, took care of racehorses, got up at every day I had to get an earlier start. Most of the grooms got up at 5. I got up at 4:30 because I wasn't as fast as they were. I needed a head start. But and then when I graduated, I couldn't find a very good job. So not knowing what else to do, I went to graduate school. And while I was in graduate school, I got a little part-time job looking up pedigrees for a horse farm owner named Tom Gentry. And Sheila and I were so poor at the time, I'll just give you this little anecdote, that our best meal of the month were beef short ribs. That's the only cut of beef we could afford. And we had them once a month because we just didn't have any money. I had a graduate student and just this one little part-time job. And one time I was there at Gentry's in the evening looking up some pedigrees and stuff. And he said, Tommy, would you mind feeding Bozo? Bozo was his dog, a St. Bernard that was about that tall. He said, would you mind feeding Bozo? The food's in there in the refrigerator on the bottom left. So, okay, I went and fed Bozo. When I got home that night, I said to Sheila, Sheila, you're not going to believe this. Our best meal of the month is what Gentry feeds his dog. But Tom Gentry did have a party, and I attended, and one of the attendees was a man named Dave Hooper. He worked for the Daily Racing Form, but he had a little side job where he read horse racing results on the radio every evening. This is before you could get information at the click of a mouse. So if you lived and had a horse farm in Lexington and you bred a horse that had run in New York that day, you had to wait till the next day to get the results, unless you listened to this race results show on the radio. So Dave Hooper was being transferred by the Daily Racing Form to Miami and couldn't find anyone to take his place. Needing a job and maybe having had a drink or so, I said, I bet I can do that. And so he said, fine, see you down at WVLK tomorrow evening at 5 o'clock. So I did show up. They didn't have anybody else. So I got the job and started reading the race results on the radio for $35 a week. Even in 1967, that was not much. And, but that was my start. And once I had that foot in the door, I sort of volunteered for everything that came up, doing a nightly sports show, then trying to learn to do play-by-play on high school football and basketball games, then coming into news, then becoming the news director, then the program director, and then moved on to television, WLAX TV in Lexington. But as you can tell by that story, my entrance into broadcasting was somewhat accidental and a long shot at best.
So Tom, for somebody who did not study to be a broadcaster, you grew up in Kentucky at a time when there were two just legendary radio play-by-play announcers. In Lexington, there was Claude Sullivan at WVLK, and in Louisville, there was Kaywood Ledford at WHAS. And both of them were doing University of Kentucky games at the time before there was a unified network. So you would have been exposed to both of them. Do you think by osmosis, perhaps, that these two great announcers impacted sort of the style that became yours?
I'm sure, Mark, that's the case. I was an avid listener to Kentucky football and basketball growing up. My dad had played football at UK, and I never dreamt I would be a broadcaster, but still, like you say, by osmosis or something, I listened to those two great broadcasters. I recently signed a book for Alan Sullivan, Claude's son, and I said in my introduction there that I'm sure somewhere in the back of my mind, Claude Sullivan's voice and style is rattling around in my head and has influenced me all those years. And Kaywood, for sure. I became friends with Kaywood, and in fact, one of the highlights early in my career was when I had just moved to television and was just, learning play-by-play. The first thing I did on television, by the way, was a play-by-play of a Kentucky-Kansas basketball game at Memorial Coliseum. Most people would give their eye teeth to do a Kentucky-Kansas basketball team, and here it was, the first thing I ever did on television. But Kaywood hired me to come and alternate with him doing games on WHAS radio, the 50,000-watt clear channel that boomed into 42 states. He hired me to be his alternate. We would alternate games in the state high school basketball tournament. So that was one of the great moments early in my career, and I was glad to become friends with Kaywood. And I've told Mark many times that Kaywood had this way to impart excitement without shouting, without raising his voice. And to me, I've always been turned off by the shouters. I'm just the complete opposite in my style. He had a way of imparting that excitement in his voice without raising his voice. And he was always honest with his listeners. If the Cats were playing bad, he said, the Cats just don't have it tonight. Knowing, his audience was primarily Kentucky fans, but knowing also that they trusted him to tell them the truth. And so no one ever got mad at him when he would say, the Cats are awful tonight. They said, well, they must be awful. And I always thought that Kaywood had a quality that you might not associate with a broadcaster, but I thought he had great dignity. And I've always admired that and tried to emulate Kaywood's dignity in a broadcast.
Yeah, I'm not old enough to remember Claude Sullivan, so I've heard just tapes. But I do think in just the way that Kaywood carried himself with, as you say, dignity and class, and he did have a voice, the timbre of his voice conveyed excitement. And I think that has been true of you in your career.
Well, I don't know if that's true or not. That would be what I want to do anyway, Mark. And As I said, I never was a shouter. My philosophy was less is more. Just, you know, try to help the viewer enjoy the game and talk about the game. And when I watch a sporting event, it's because I want to see that event. It's not because I tuned in to hear who he thinks are the 10 best, you know, blah, blah. I don't care. I have my own thoughts. I don't care. What I want to do is watch the event because that's the reason I tuned in to start with. So I always had that in mind, I think. And, uh, and I just never was a shouter. I hear so many now that are shouters, and I understand that now there are 200 choices on television, so maybe you have to make yourself stand out. But that just wasn't my style, that shouting style. And an example, I guess, of the less is more was when I would, with my co-commentators, when some dramatic moment would happen that I thought was, you know, was worthy, I would give them a hand. I was famous at NBC for the hand. The hand meant don't say anything, because sometimes there are these dramatic moments that um, words can't express as well as a picture could. I can only, I can only distract from it by what I might say in most cases. And so, let the moment play, let that drama play. And at that network level, you have such accomplished cameramen and directors that the pictures they get are just do tell the story. And as an example of what I'm talking about, when American Pharoah won the Belmont Stakes to be the first Triple Crown winner in 37 years, it was pandemonium at Belmont Park. 90,000 there. They capped the attendance at 90,000. And the people are going crazy. They're standing on tables, they're standing on chairs, they're throwing things in the air. They're all videotaping with their cameras. And it was just pandemonium. And I said, and all the Olympic stadiums I've been in, all the football stadiums, everything else, that is amongst the loudest I've ever heard. I don't think there's anything even louder than that. And it was just such a moment that when Larry Comas, who called the race, said, the 37-year drought is over. American Pharoah has won the Triple Crown. The hands went up to the to Jerry Bailey and Randy Moss, and they never had the hand before, and they were like, but that was just such a moment. And Drew Esikoff is the Hall of Fame director on the thoroughbred racing on NBC, and his cameraman and he had the most dramatic shots that told the story much better than anything I could have said. So we had the hand out for a long time, very long time, and then Victor Espinoza pulled up American Pharoah and did a wonderful thing. Instead of coming right back into the winner's circle, he took him the length of that Belmont Park grandstand, which is huge. It's being torn down now, actually. But if you stood it on its end, it'd be taller than the Empire State Building. And he brought him all the way down and all the way back so that all the fans could have a good look at it. And that was a dramatic moment. So that's an example of the hand.
As someone who was watching that event on his couch in Lexington, what I do remember about that is when you did start talking, there was I could feel your excitement, your voice, there was an elevated timbre.
Yeah, it was hard not to have at that time, and that's, maybe I should have been screaming at that time, but that was one of the great moments of my career. And I was beginning to think I wasn't ever going to see it or broadcast a Triple Crown again. I had been standing next to my friend Chick Anderson, who spent a lot of time as the PA announcer here at Churchill Downs. I was standing next to my friend Chick when he called the Belmont Stakes in 1978, affirmed in Alydar, called it at the track and for CBS. And one of the greatest races I've ever seen, if you remember the race, Alydar and Affirmed were head and head for the final mile of the mile-and-a-half race. And Alydar actually took the lead in the stretch, and then Affirmed found a way to win the Triple Crown. And then we went all those years, and I was afraid I was never going to see another one. And then along the way, I thought Funny Side would win. I thought Sparty Jones would win, and they always disappointed me. But so finally, American Pharoah came through, and it was one of the great moments of my broadcasting career.
Which leads me perfectly to what I wanted to ask next, which is, Tom, obviously horse racing, I mean, you covered a lot of sports. Your versatility was, one of the strengths of your career, but you're very identified with horse racing. How did you fall in love with that sport?
Well, I guess we give Keeneland a big nod of the head. I actually went to Keeneland for the first time in 1956 when Nashua, the great racehorse, had been retired to stand at Spendthrift Farm. And before he went to the farm, they paraded him in front of the fans at Keeneland. Not racing, just paraded him around for everyone to see. That was the first time I went. Uh, and no races, just to see Nashua. So as a 15-year-old, it was a Saturday afternoon with a lot of the other Lafayette football players that we had played the night before. And it was one of those things that young people do. Well, what do you want to do today? I don't know. What do you want to do? Well, what do you want to do? And somebody said, let's go to Keeneland. So we went to the races at Keeneland, and I just fell in love with the sport, with the color, the drama, the excitement of it. And I was hooked. And I said, this is something I think I want to do in my life, is have something to do with the world of thoroughbred racing and breeding.
Now, Tom, as I'm sure all of you know, went on to become one of the most prominent sports broadcasters in the United States. But in his home state, he probably was best known for his, 3 decades calling Southeastern Conference basketball,
Yeah, 30 years.
syndicated package. I was curious, you worked in SEC basketball for 3 decades. You're dealing with all the coaches, Dale Brown and Wimp Sanderson and Bruce Pearl and Billy Donovan. How did they react to the fact that not only were you a Kentucky guy, you literally grew up on the UK campus?
Well, by then, most of those coaches you just mentioned had seen me. Wimp Sanderson was a little rough sometimes. Had seen me in action though, and had come to believe that I would be impartial, give him a straight shot. But when I first started, I mean, Norm Sloan was my nemesis. He was the coach at Florida, a famous cheater, by the way, at North Carolina State. And he was my nemesis. He even reported me to the commissioner of the Southeastern Conference for not giving them their due when they won the conference championship. And he said, because they lost a game, but still won the conference championship because somebody else lost too. And I said on the air that they backed into the championship. So he went off on that. Even at a press conference at the SEC tournament, he even spent 10 minutes vilifying me in front of all the media. So, but anyway, I think after I did it 30 years, but after I'd worked a while, they came to believe that that I would give them a straight shot. And everybody always says, was that difficult for you to be impartial when Kentucky was playing? And I really didn't find it to be difficult. And I'm a professional announcer, and that's my job, is to do an impartial broadcast. And so that's what I did. I just didn't think it was that difficult. Same thing applied when I did Notre Dame football games. The Notre Dame fans might be worse than the Kentucky basketball fans as far as avid fans, and they didn't understand why I wasn't more of a homer. After all, you're doing all the Notre Dame games but they were the Notre Dame games on NBC, a national network. And when NBC first got the rights to those, the home games, the administrators at Notre Dame said, look, we don't want you to be a homer. We want you to do a broadcast as you would on any national game. And, that's the way we want it. We don't want you to be. But the Notre Dame fans didn't quite understand that concept. They thought that if I wasn't for Notre Dame, then I must be for the other team. And so we had a couple of little discussions from time to time.
Well, that is a little ahead of where I was, but I was going to ask you about Notre Dame, so I'll just do that now. When you started out, you claimed to be one of the, say, 4 people in the country that did not have strong feelings one way or the other about Notre Dame, kind of neutral. But you sort of came to sort of believe in kind of how they do things. As what made you feel that way?
There's something about it. You're right about Notre Dame. You either love them or you hate them passionately. I may be one of the few that just, I was neutral on them. I didn't have any strong feelings. As I got up there and began doing the Notre Dame games for almost 20 years, I guess, Notre Dame home games on NBC, I came to believe that they didn't always succeed, but they try to do it the right way. They try to make their football players actual students. They go to class. They live in the dorms. They compete in intramural other sports. They try to be actual students. And when we would come to do a game, we always would go to the opposing team's campus just to show them we are not the Notre Dame network. We're coming to your campus. We're going to talk to you and meet with you and see everything about you before we go to Notre Dame. And then we would go to Notre Dame and meet with their players and coaches. And I have to say that uh, in almost every instance, the Notre Dame players were more well-spoken, were more serious, were more real students than some of the players we talked to from other places. That does not mean every other player, but just as a generality. And so I came to believe that in an age where everybody was cheating or they're doing this or they're not, make him go to class or all these things that you know about for all these years, they at least intended and tried to do it the right way. As I say, they didn't always succeed, but another one of my nemesis, by the way, is that a right, nemesis is that a word?
I think it is. Nemesis.
Nemesis. Anyway, was Lou Holtz, when he was the coach of Notre Dame, was the worst coach I ever dealt with. He was just tough to be around. We would always we had an appointment where we always go in right after lunch on Fridays and talk to him about the game. And this is something we did for all the sports. You talk to the players and the coaches and everything to get an idea of what they're intending to do in the game, and that helps us broadcast the game. It also makes the coaches look good because we understand what they're trying to do. We don't say, oh, this is some crazy thing, because we knew what he was trying to do. So the coaches that get that are the ones that talk to you and tell you things that helps you broadcast. The coaches that don't get it are, grousing about having to come talk to you and all these other things. So Lou Holtz is in the latter category. And in fact, when Chris Collinsworth and I were doing the games, when we would first walk in, first thing he would do is say, what can I do for you boys today? And he, we've only done this every week for, years and years. And he would take off his watch ostentatiously and look at it and put it right there on the desk right in front of me. And he would, in the however many years I did when he was coach, the Notre Dame games, he never once called me by my name. He had no idea who I was. And, I was just that guy that did, whatever. So, in fact, one time, and people would tell him that this is when Chris Collinsworth had a sports talk show on WOW in Cincinnati. And he was quite a controversial character at that time. He would say things that would upset people. And so every week we'd go in to see Lou Holtz, and he'd say, well, now I heard on your radio station, I heard you say, and of course he never heard it, just people would tell him, and you know how things go when the story gets told. So one day before a game, and we were in Lou Holtz's office, and Chris says, now, Coach, I don't know if you know Chris. Chris' roots are in Kentucky and has a little twang when he's just talking. Now, Coach, what about your offensive line? I don't see any holes there. And Holtz goes ballistic. He said, what are you talking about? The offensive line is the strength of our team. They're the best part of our team. You don't know what you're talking about. You're absolutely incompetent, and stormed out of the office. And I said, Chris, what are you talking about? The offensive line is good. He said, well, that's what I mean. I don't see any holes there. Of course, Coach Holtz took it to mean they weren't opening any holes in the line. And what Chris meant was, I don't see any problems with them. So I said, oh, that's what you meant. I said, well, go tell him that. So Chris followed Lou Holtz into the bathroom, and they stood at the urinal ironing things out.
So Tom Dickenberg is a person that was important both in your career and in your life?
Should I tell the story about how our friendship was cemented to start with?
I think you should.
Okay. Yeah, he was, and as Mark said, he was my mentor and my friend. When I was at WLAX TV, an NBC affiliate, when NBC would come to town to broadcast a Kentucky basketball game at Memorial Coliseum, I would go down to the Coliseum to meet with them and just try to tell them what I knew about Kentucky that might help them broadcast the game. This is the era of the greatest trio in sports broadcasting history, Dick Enberg, Billy Packer, and Al McGuire. And I would just tell them something, a little tidbit here and there that might help them in the broadcast. And so, I became sort of friends with them. And on one of these occasions, Dick Enberg says to me, my plane doesn't leave until about 5 hours after the game will be over on Saturday. Is there any way you can take me to see Secretariat? And I said, sure. I can do that. So I did make the arrangements, and when the game was over, got in my car, drove to Paris to Claiborne Farm, went out to Secretariat's paddock, and as we stood there by the fence, Secretariat came over to see what was going on. We were joined by Seth Hancock, whose family, the Hancock family, owns Claiborne Farm. And as we're standing there looking at Secretariat, Dick Enberg says to me, he says, well, how can you tell if a horse is going to be great? I said, well, you really can't. It's really an inexact science. You can study their pedigree, what their ancestors have done. You can look at how they're all put together, their conformation. And then after that, though, it's, good luck. And as I was saying that, as I finished, Seth Hancock said, sometimes you can just see it in their eyes. And when he said that, Secretariat went and looked right at Dick Enberg, looked him right in the eye. He never forgot that. And that was the beginning of our friendship. So I'd say he was my mentor as well as being my friend. And we had lots of adventures.
You followed him into how many different sports?
Yeah, lots of different sports. Followed him, well, at the Breeders' Cup, I followed him, and I followed him in figure skating and
Notre
track
Dame
and field,
football.
Notre Dame football, yeah. But he was a good friend, and we went to Royal Ascot together one time. I made a deal with him. I would take him to Royal Ascot if he would take me to Wimbledon, which he was broadcasting on NBC at the time. So we put on the top hat and tails and went to the Royal enclosure at Ascot. That was a memorable thing, and he was just a kind friend. When my first year doing NFL football, NBC always has a seminar to start the season, going over the rules, how will we cover this, how will we do this. And so the first day of the seminar, it's over, and everybody's going to their limos and out. I don't know anybody there except Dick Enberg. And so I guess I'll slink back to the hotel and, eat room service or something. And Dick comes up to me and says, why don't you and I just go have a steak at Smith and Walensky? Let's go. And anybody in that room would have been given anything to go to dinner with Dick Enberg. He was the premier sports broadcaster in the country. And here he is coming over to me and saying, let's go to dinner together, two of us. So that meant a lot to me, and that's just typical of kind of friend he was. When I retired, after NBC made me an offer that I said, no, I'm not going to do that. That was 2018. And it was springtime, and I was at Keeneland in my little spot in the press box. I have a spot in the Keeneland press box that has my name on it. I've only been going there for 50 years, so why not? But and Dick Enberg made a trip in to Lexington. Of course, he loved to go to Keeneland, so that didn't matter either. But he came up to the Keeneland press box, and he saw me, and he said, "It happens to all of us," because I'd come to the end of my career and had turned down the NBC's offer, which was pitiful. And so he understood, because it had happened to him and happened to everybody else, just as happened to Bob Costas and Al Michaels and all the rest of us. As we get a little age on us, they don't mind ditching you. But anyway, Dick came up to me, made a special trip
From California.
from California, his home, and to say, it happens to all of us. So that's the kind of friend he was.
So how many people watched the Paris Olympics this summer? How many people watched the men's 100 meters dash? What do y'all remember about it? Well, I'll tell you, they blew the call. They had the wrong winner. So Tom, you called that event what? Every Olympics from 92 to 2016?
Right, that Summer Games, yeah.
And you say that is the hardest event, the hardest thing you've had to do as a broadcaster. Why?
First of all, the whole world's watching. You're about to nominate, or not nominate, but select the world's fastest man, the men's 100 meters at the Olympics. So the whole world's watching. The race lasts for 9 seconds. There's no margin for error. If there's no time to think about it. If it doesn't come out right, then you've blown the call. And as Mark said, that never happened to me, luckily. But that's the most difficult thing that there was, because again, there's no time to think. There's no room to make a mistake. It's either coming out right, or you've made a fool of yourself in front of millions and billions of people. So fear is a great motivating factor. But I will say that the task did get easier when Usain Bolt was in the field. That made it a little easier.
Yeah, here's a question you can't ask everybody. What's Usain Bolt really like?
Hey, I think he's when he first came on the scene, in fact, Tyson Gay of Lexington beat him in the World Championships in Osaka, Japan, the year before the Olympics. But in Beijing, he came out and in the 100 meters, no one was expecting this. He, clowning around in the last few steps of the race, shattered the world record. He shattered it. He didn't just break it. And no telling how fast he could have gone if he weren't just clowning around and everything at the end of the race. In fact, we looked down at the tape later on, and his shoe was untied. Um, so I'm saying, who is this guy? This clowning around. So when I got to know him better and see him more often, uh, he did all that clowning around both before, after, and during the race because it kept him loose. That was his vehicle for being loose and able to perform his best. And I never, you could look down before the race and the young kids that are there with a basket so that you put your warm-ups off and then the kids carried. He'd be fooling with them. I can remember just looking over there. There was a young boy that was getting ready to take his sweats away, and Usain Bolt, before this was the 200 meters thing, just before he's running a huge race, and he has a shoe and he reaches out to hand it to the boy, and as the boy reaches for it, he jerked it back. He jerked it back and just playing a trick on him before he's getting ready to run, a huge race. He was that kind of guy. He now owns a bar in Kingston, by the way, and played some soccer in Europe. Soccer was his first love, as a matter of fact. And at 6'5", you don't see many sprinters that tall. They're normally just getting uncoiled at 100 meters. So he was a unique individual. And for everybody that thought he was, clowning around and that was, that he had no respect, one of the things I did observe was that when he finished his last race of the Olympics, he would go down the row of all the broadcasters and writers from all over the world. And everybody that wanted to talk to him, he would talk with them. He didn't, this might be some small country. He would never turn anyone down. He was so gracious with his time in that regard. And I also noticed that if he would be talking to someone and they would have a medal ceremony and they were about to play the national anthem of some country, he would stop whatever he was doing and he wouldn't stand at attention, but he would stand respectfully facing the flag as they raised it there at the stadium. So he had that aspect to him too that most people wouldn't realize unless they'd been able to observe him so many times.
Tom, you wound up the voice of Olympic figure skating. And I can't say, having lived in Lexington, that there's a vigorous figure skating community.
Oh,
No, I know there's some.
I think there's probably more than some, because figure skating, as it turns out, is the most watched Olympic sport, winter or summer. It's the most watched Olympic sport. So I'm sure there are. See, what happens is the ladies take over the TV when the figure skating is on.
No, I'm not. I wasn't talking about how many people were watching. I just don't think there are a lot of. I don't think you grew up following figure skating in Lexington, and like you did football.
No, I did. That's for sure. But writing about the book, a lady from, I think, Georgia, wrote me a letter and said that she used to always wave at me because she was originally from UK. She used to always wave at me at the figure skating, and she said, that's what I know you for figure skating. So
where this is going, though, is you came to believe that the most pressure on any athletes in any sport you ever broadcast are the women's figure skaters in the gold medal in the long program.
When I first was asked to do figure skating or told to do figure skating by NBC, I wasn't even sure it was a sport. I thought it was all fluff and feathers and, well, okay. So, oh no. But here I have to learn about it now. So I quickly try to cram and learn some things. And the first event I did was the World Championships in Munich. And there was a meeting before the event. And the producer was David Michaels, who is the younger brother of Al Michaels. He was the producer and held this meeting, and all the announcers and all the production people were in there. And as the meeting progressed, I was standing there and sitting there with a stunned look on my face. And as the meeting was over, I kind of waited till everyone sort of filed out, and then I went up and said, David, you know that I didn't understand a single thing you guys were talking about, and here I'm supposed to do this broadcast. You'll be fine. So I didn't know what to do. Sandra Bezic, who was one of the commentators, a former skater from Canada and a choreographer, grabbed me and said, "Come on, we're going to practice." So we went over to the practice rink and sat in the front row. And Kurt Browning was the reigning world champion from Canada. And right in front of us, he came by and went, "Phew." And I said, "Well, hold on there. That wasn't fluff and feathers. That took some athletic ability, some strength, and all these other things. So maybe I should take a second look at all this." So I did come to respect them, respect their abilities and their athletic ability and their strength and everything about that it takes to skate like that. And it wasn't all fluff and feathers, and I was happy to see it. Now, what Mark said that I've come to realize is that the most pressure-packed event, and when I say this to some of my male friends, they just shake their head, but I really believe this. The most pressure-packed event in the world of sports is the ladies' Olympic long program. Why? Well, you've worked your whole life for this moment, and you're probably not going to get another moment like this. Maybe you'll come to the Olympics next year, but probably not. That rarely happens. So this is the thing you've worked your whole life for. You're out there on the ice by yourself for 3.5 minutes, knowing that if you make the slightest bobble, the slightest mistake, that your whole life's work is gone, undone. And that's real pressure. And there's nobody to get the rebound if you miss, and there's no way to come back next year and make a putt at the Masters, and on, the old things you can say. But I'm losing my voice. I say that's the most pressure-packed event, I think, in sports. And actually, you're going to ask me about the famous event where that came through, the pressure hit the
Tom, what are your
skaters.
recollections
Thank you.
of the 2002 Women's Olympic?
See, he knows. So Michelle Kwan, the most decorated American skater ever, had won everything in sight except an Olympic gold medal. And her chief rival was Irina Slutskaya of Russia. So the two of those were expected to fight it out for the gold medal in Salt Lake City. And also on the U.S. team was a 16-year-old American that had no chance, anybody thought, to win anything, and that would be Sarah Hughes. She was a fluke just to make the team and go, learn something and have some fun at the Olympics. Well, they skate the short program, and as expected, Kwan and Slutskaya are the top two spots. In fourth place, with a scoring system that time and no chance to win, is Sarah Hughes. The chances of her winning are so slim that everyone dismisses it. So they come to the time of the long program, the night of the long program, and Slutskaya, I think, skates first and does not skate that well. Well, I'm jumping ahead of myself. I need to go back to the short program once. When Sarah Hughes did skate her short program, I said on the air, Sarah Hughes just brought the house down. She skated an unbelievably flawless program with difficult items in it. And the look on her face when she finished, and she just sort of fell to the ice and like, what just happened? So here she is, but still only in fourth place and probably not a chance to win. Anyway, I'm messing up my story. So anyway, Sarah Hughes in the long program did skate the skate of her life, had that look on her face, while Slutskaya and Kwan succumbed to the pressure. Neither skated their best, which opened the door for Sarah Hughes. And when she did have that unbelievable skate, brought the house down, her scores were good enough to get her the gold medal. And the shot that the director and the cameraman got of her backstage, she'd already finished her skate, backstage, finally realizing that she had won the gold medal, the look on her face was priceless, something I'll never forget. So I kind of bobbled around on that story, but the pressure got to the two favorites, and someone with no pressure on them at all, 16-year-old, not expected to do anything, came out, skated the skate of her life, and won the gold medal.
So Tom, I don't think we can come to Louisville without asking what interactions, if any, did you have with Muhammad Ali?
Well, I never covered boxing, so I never covered any of his events, but I did grow up watching him on Tomorrow's Champions, which was a show here on Wave TV where they had young fighters fighting. Ed Calais did the play-by-play, if anybody remembers that. He was in the old timers in here where he was the sportsman. When Kaywood was at WHAS, Ed Calais was at Wave. And so some event that NBC had in New York, and Muhammad Ali was there, and I struck up a conversation with him. And at one point, I said to him, and this is when he had Parkinson's, and he just talked barely above a whisper. But I said to him, you know, I used to watch you box on Tomorrow's Champions when you were 16 years old in Louisville. I used to watch it on Wave TV. And he stopped a minute, looked, reached down close to my ear and said, "You're old."
So I'm going to wind this down here and we'll throw it open for questions from the floor. I've got just a couple more. Tom, what do you see as the future for the horse industry? Do you think it's in good shape here in Kentucky? Do you think it's in good shape in the United States? And sort of what do you see as kind of the primary issues affecting that industry that is so important to our state?
There's lots of questions there. And I see some horse people in here, so they'll be fact checking me. In Kentucky, I think it's in good shape. Keeneland just finished their fall meet with record mutual handle. The purses are good, thanks to the instant horse racing machines, what they call the slot machines. And nationwide is not the same story. The traditional problem has been no central authority to make the rules, uniform rules for medication or other things. And so there's been a wide disparity and wide governances and wide enforcements of all those things. There is a new entity, HISA, which is intended to be the czar of horse racing, to make the decisions, make a central authority, make those decisions. The Supreme Court just affirmed their right to be the overseer of horse racing. So perhaps they can bring about some changes and restore the public's confidence in it, which was eroded a lot with all the string of injuries we had. The Kentucky Derby has become a go-to event. It's not a sporting event anymore in my mind. It's become something that people from around the world have in their bucket list, and they're going to come to the Derby, and they experience it, and that's good. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's good, but it's ceased to become really a sporting event. It's an event. It's just an event with everything included with it. So the mutual handle is good. Nobody goes to the races anymore except Saratoga, Keeneland, Churchill Downs sometimes, Del Mar, Santa Anita sometimes. But the rest of the tracks, nobody ever goes. Everybody stays home and bets with their computer. So in some instances, the betting is still strong. And the ownership, I think, is strong. The new thing is to have partnerships. So when a man used to go to the sale, a rich man, and spend $2 million to buy a yearling, a well-bred yearling, now they go to the sale and buy that yearling, and then there will be 6 partners that come in. So partnerships, spreading the risk is the thing now. And there are some entities like myracehorse.com that has thousands of people that have signed on. And a horse wins a big race, and he may have 260 owners. They don't all get into the winner's circle, luckily, but that's the current state. The future, I think, is that partnership to spread the risk around, and hopefully with central authority, the popularity of it with the non-racing fan will come back. But in the meantime, the people that own the horses, every time they have a sale, it's a record. The demand for horses is still very strong. The foal crop has gone down, so the demand is even exceeding the supply. And so the answer to your question is, in some areas it's strong, in some places it's strong, in other areas it's become just a niche sport, not in the mainstream anymore.
This will be my last question, and we'll throw it open. If you buy the book, there is a whole chapter on Tom's one great professional regret. So that's there if you want it.
Mark is always, by the way, chiding me. He said, "Don't tell all the stories. Nobody will buy the book."
I believe in moving product. But Tom, what are you, as you look back on your career, what are you proudest of?
Oh gosh, Mark, I don't think that you haven't asked me this question before in our little sessions. I'm proud to have made it to the network when there were only three of them, ABC, NBC, CBS. There was no ESPN, there was no Fox even, there was nothing else, those three networks. And to make it to the network was pretty much a long shot for a guy that never worked in a market bigger than Lexington. So I was proud of that fact, proud of the fact that I found my way by volunteering for everything. When something would say, we need somebody to do this, everybody would be saying, oh, not me. I'd say, yeah, I'll do it. And that, I don't know, that always seemed to work out for me. It was like that in starting in broadcasting. Well, I don't know anything about broadcasting, but here there's a job open and let me try that. So that's what got me into broadcasting in the first place. And once I got there, volunteering for other things, and even on higher levels, that when they said, do figure skating or do track and field, I knew nothing about them. I said, I can learn and I can do it. So I'm proud of that. And I don't know, proud of the fact I was in an age of specialization, able to do all those different sports that I did. And the nicest compliment, the best thing that ever happens to me is when I'm in the airport or on the street or at a ball game or something, and a total stranger will come up to me and said, I'm from Kentucky, and I just wanted to tell you, you make us proud. And that's the best. That's the best.
Now, if anybody has a question, raise your hand and the mic will come.
Tom, what do you, with college sports, particularly basketball and football, where do you, sorry? Okay, sorry.
Mike,
Okay.
okay. I know Mike, by the way.
I went to college with them. We were Curry brothers. So, in college sports, particularly football and basketball, how do you see it evolving with the NIL and all the other things that are going on? Are we ever going to be able to get back to a more common sense approach?
I'm
or
hoping,
is it
yeah.
going to explode?
There needs to be some common sense. Mark says, oh, they've been doing this all along. Now it's just legal. But you know, to see Tony Bennett leave, to see, coaches are saying, you know, enough is enough. To see Nick Saban leave, that tells you something. And they're giving up, you know, millions of dollars in contracts just to say, no, I can't do this anymore. So in some ways it's good. I think that the players should be compensated and should have been compensated over all these years because they are using their name, image, and likeness to benefit the university. And they're raking in billions of dollars on their abilities and on their, you know, faces and everything else. So the players deserve to be compensated for that. But to me, there has to be some sort of governance, some cap on, you know, rich schools just, you know, giving as much money as they can to attract a player. And it's just like free agency and a professional. You just go to the highest bidder. None of the other stuff matters anymore. But Mark has pointed out to me that where I thought that would concentrate all the talent at the richest schools, the current results show that it's actually spreading the talent out. So Mike, I have no easy answer, but I think it's wild, crazy, that needs to be some sort of governance. But if you complain about something, you need to have an answer to it, and I have no answer. I really don't.
I was going to ask you about NLI.
Right.
He beat me to it. Just a comment and maybe anything you want to add to it. The year Secretariat won the Triple Crown in record-breaking times. There was another horse that, who had been born a year earlier, a year later, would go down, and everybody in this room would know the name. Sham.
Yep.
Got anything to say about that?
Secretariat's foil, and you know, a lot of Secretariat's greatness would not be there were it not for Sham bringing it out in him, just as Alidar brought out and affirmed. Great rivalries in any sport, I think, bring out the best in everybody and everything, and Sham did that with Secretariat. And you mentioned something that just triggered my mind. One of the other great moments that in broadcasting horse racing. Actually, I didn't broadcast it. I just observed it. I did narrate a feature on it, so maybe I did broadcast it. But when Cody's Wish came out, you know, I'm sure you know the story of the young man in the wheelchair and unable to speak or walk, and the Make-A-Wish Foundation arranged for him to meet a young horse, and a weanling horse, came out, and the horse and the boy just bonded immediately. The horse came over to the wheelchair and just laid his head in Cody Dorman's lap. Wow, this was a bond that formed between these two. When the horse became then a yearling, it was a little more, hard to handle. And Cody wanted to go back and see the horse again. And I said, oh, I don't know. But they took him back, and again, it just clicked. The horse just came right over to him and was docile as can be around Cody. And so they named him Cody's Wish, the horse Cody's Wish. And his career didn't start out so well. I think he was 0 for his first 3 races. And the Dorman family from Richmond, Kentucky said, we got to go see him run. We got to help him out. We got to go see him run. So they came to Churchill Downs to see him run, and sure enough, he won. And the next time he ran again. He won 5 in a row. He went and won a big race at Saratoga, the 4-Go Stakes, which set him up for the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. And the Dirt Mile was held that year at Keeneland. The Breeders' Cup that year was at Keeneland, the first time Cody's Wish ran at the Breeders' Cup. And NBC had asked me to come narrate the feature about this, which was such a touching feature. I mean, it was amazing, and I was so honored to be asked to come and do it. They said, you're the only one that can do this justice. So I did it, tried to do my best. And so I'm just now watching the race, and the broadcast is on, and I'm sitting at a table with several people. One of them is Nancy Cox, who is the dean of the College of Agriculture, Food, and Environment at UK. And she didn't know the story, hadn't seen the feature. So it's coming up in the Dirt Miles, the next race. So I got my phone out and called up the feature and let her watch it, and other people around the table watching it too. So they're watching on this phone, and now everybody's crying after watching the feature. And so then the race happens. They come to the top of the stretch, and he's last, Cody's Wish. And then just on the outside, here he comes. And he won by about that much. And now everybody's cheering. They're cheering. And then after he wins, now everybody's crying again as he goes into the winner's circle. But it was, it's those kind of stories. I always said that the Olympics have the greatest stories of all. And broadcasters these days have to be storytellers. The greatest stories are at the Olympics. There's so many of them from so many different areas of the world. But the next runner-up in terms of stories is thoroughbred horse racing, the story of the horses, the trainers, the owners, the jockeys. And this story, Cody's Wish, I think was one of the most memorable that I ever came across.
I think we have time for one more question.
Was there one event that you always wanted to make the call on that you never got the chance to do?
Yeah, and as Mark said, that there's a whole chapter in the book about it. And it was the Super Bowl. And it's a convoluted story, but I was in line to be the #1 NFL broadcaster at NBC. I'd done in NFL all along until NBC lost the rights for a period of years. And then they came back with Sunday Night Football. But I was in line to. Dick Enberg had left, and I was in line to do Sunday Night Football. But John Madden, NBC had to have John Madden, who had been on Fox and then had been doing Monday Night Football. Is that right? Yeah. And they had to have him because John Madden was a unique broadcaster, one of the few broadcasters that I think people tuned in just to hear him, not the event. So they had to have him, and John Madden was balking at having someone new as his partner. He said, I'm too old and too, they said, well, Tom, and they showed tapes of Tom, how he makes they said, now I didn't say this, they said that makes his partners better, blah, 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 blah. And he wasn't sure he wanted to take on somebody new. Al Michaels, who had been his partner, was still under contract at ABC. And so we're at an impasse. And Madden is finally thinking, well, maybe I can do it. So there was the USC Notre Dame football game, and the game that became famous for the Bush Push. The Bush Push, pushing a runner in those days was illegal. Now it's legal, and everybody does it on every play. It became legal after this event. So USC and Notre Dame, Notre Dame's ahead, but USC is threatening. There's only a few seconds left, and there's a play on the far end of the end zone that I think is the last play of the game. The Notre Dame players, the students, everybody is rushing onto the field, and I say Notre Dame won. Well, it turns out the game wasn't over. He stepped out of bounds. There's one more play. And on that play, Reggie Bush, the running back from USC, Heisman Trophy winner, pushed Matt Leinart, the quarterback, into the end zone, which was technically illegal. The officials didn't see it and didn't call a penalty. I didn't see it. Pat Hayden, my partner, didn't see it. We didn't mention it. We didn't see it. In fact, I talked to some of the writers that were there afterwards, and they said, "Well, we all thought Notre Dame won. We didn't see that Bush push." The only way it came out was in the locker room afterwards. Reggie Bush and his ego not letting, since he didn't score the winning touchdown, had to say, I pushed him in. He wouldn't have scored if I hadn't pushed him in. And so that became then headlines that this illegal play enabled USC to beat Notre Dame. And the other part of it is that, we didn't mention it on the broadcast. So John Madden's agent, Sandy Montag, planted some stories in the New York papers for the next day saying that Tom Hammond missed the call in the Notre Dame USC game and will not be doing Sunday Night Football. So that was my one regret, the Bush push. And then it turns out, in retrospect, if I'd been following Al Michaels, even with John Madden, I would have been under a microscope and probably couldn't satisfy anybody. And when he come down to it, also, I'm more of a college sports guy, and I probably would have been better off staying with Notre Dame, which is what happened. And so, and besides that, I had a great run. Who could complain about it? So that was my only regret, and that I didn't get to call a Super Bowl, which I would have been in line to do had it all worked out. But that's it. Not lots of positive things, and only that one small regret.
Well, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure to hear both of you talk and to hear your reminiscences and stories. After we've wrapped up tonight, we do have books for sale, and Mr. Hammond will be available to sign your book. So thank you once again for coming to the Filson, and we hope to see you again soon.
And thanks for having us.